did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
He has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions.
There were no concerns raised, Madam Vice President.
Joe Biden is not on the ballot. I'm
and they
in the
didn't
middle
bring up
of
that
responding.
bill.
Kamala Harris just had one of the worst interviews in her entire career, and I have to say everything that could have gone wrong did, and it descended effectively into a shouting match. I'm a body language analyst, and this is my breakdown.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration, because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right now,
just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a
an
rough
immigration
estimate of 6 million people
that
have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
So Kamala has her legs folded here, which is a very confident piece of body language. Folding of the legs hinders our ability to respond to a threat, indicating that she's in a calm and relaxed state. This positioning may be deliberate to elude confidence, so we'll have to wait and see if her other nonverbals support this.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the...
Yes, ma'am. May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You had the White House and the Senate, and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
Kamala shows extreme signs of muscle tension here with her voice and gives off a very clear vocal tremor. When our stress levels spike, adrenaline is released into the bloodstream via the adrenal glands, which causes our muscles to tense up to become stronger and more resistant to damage. This causes the muscles around the throat to also tense up, which causes the voice to become hoarse and rough. She does this here. Being challenged by the interviewer creates an extremely obvious reaction.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem. And from day one, then, we have done a number of things, including to address our asylum system and put more resources, getting more judges, what we needed to do to tighten up penalties and increase penalties for illegal crossings, what we needed to do to deal with points of entry between border entry points. That's the work we did, and we worked on supporting what was a bipartisan effort, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress, to actually strengthen the border. To the trafficking of drugs, guns, and human beings. And Donald Trump, but let me just finish.
6 Democrats voted against that bill.
Learned about that bill and told them to kill it because he preferred to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And in this election, this is rightly a discussion that the American people want to have. And what they want are solutions, and they want a president of the United States who's not playing political games with the issue,
I hear you,
but actually is focused on fixing it.
6 Democrats voted against that bill. It would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it. These are the 6 Democrats. But more importantly, back to the original premise, Jocelyn Nungary, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were brutally assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday, campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Brett,
those families an apology?
She does what's called a distancing behavior here when confronted by the fact that her administration's policy led to the deaths of these innocent people. She diverts her attention away from the reporter in an attempt to reduce her physiological arousal. This is an extreme sign of discomfort.
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Madam Vice President.
To ensure that no future harm would occur. And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election, because there was a solution, Brett.
When it comes to immigration, you supported allowing immigrants in the country illegally to apply for driver's license, to qualify for free tuition at universities, to be enrolled in free health care. Do you still support those things?
Listen, that was 5 years ago.
She then does another very obvious distancing behavior and also exhibits the Globus sensation when confronted on the fact that she supported illegal immigrants getting driver's licenses and applications for free university places. She diverts her eyes to the floor, which is another way our brain distances. She also shows signs of the Globus sensation, which is a result of the muscle tension around the throat, causing her to have an increased urge to swallow. This is also known as a lump in the throat and shows that she's extremely stressed.
And I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again, and as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before.
If that's the case, you chose a running mate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, who signed those very things into state law. So do you support that?
We are very clear, and I am very clear, as is Tim Walz, that we must support and enforce federal law, and that is exactly what we will do. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C.
Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years, so what are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we have been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other. Rhetoric and an approach to leadership that suggests that the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down instead of what we all know. The strength of leadership is based on who you lift up. The strength of an American president, which is one who understands that the vast majority of us have more in common than what separates us.
If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
When confronted on the fact that she's been in office for nearly 4 years and that the Democrats have been in power for the majority of the past decade, we see her do what's called a smile mask. She does this as a way to conceal her true emotions by presenting a more socially acceptable outward demeanor. The reporter makes a solid argument and she knows that she can't counter it. This creates a strong feeling of stress, and she masks this stress by smiling. She goes from displaying elevated muscle tension with her brow to smiling, which is totally out of place. This is not natural behavior, and she does this frequently, and I think it just creates a sense of untrustworthiness.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade,
But you're
people
the
have
lever of
become.
power.
But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president. One, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous, and that people are exhausted.
So are they misguided, the 50%?
Listen,
Are they stupid? What is
God,
it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people. What he has been saying about the enemy within, that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people, that's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you,
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
He's quoted in the Bob Woodward book that way, yes. Let me ask you this, Madam Vice President. You call Donald Trump...
The significance of that.
You call Donald Trump...
He's unstable. He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you...
Kamala does something very interesting here. She makes a very bold attack on Trump's mental stability. And when the reporter mentions that she's attacking his stability and also mental ability, she then realizes what's going to come next and does what's called a prolonged blink before clarifying that she said stable. She knows full well that he's going to bring up Biden's mental decline, which in the eyes of the public is fact. The prolonged blink is another method of distancing used to protect a person from something that generates them extreme stress.
You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room, and he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
This brief moment is super revealing. After the reporter asks when she realized his mental capacity was diminishing, she has her mouth open. When the brain's defense mechanism gets triggered by extreme levels of stress, it forces our mouths open in order to intake as much oxygen as possible, in order to provide the muscles with the energy it needs to defend itself upon entering the fight, flight, freeze response. Out of all the questions asked in this interview, this one gives her the strongest visible impact in terms of her non-verbal communication. We also see her lips start to quiver, which is an effect of the extreme muscle tension. Another thing we also see is a massive increase in the amount of inhaling she's doing. She gets in as many big, deep inhales as possible before speaking.
I understand.
And Donald Trump
But you talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
She then changes her proxemics and leans back, as well as distances her eyes to the floor, when being told that she met with him frequently, and that she still claims she has no concerns. He is generating extreme stress in her, and you have to ask why. If Biden were fine, why would she express such a strong reaction? She knows full well he was mentally declining, and the amount of politics that went on behind the scenes to get him ousted from the candidacy would have been hell for her. If she comes out now and tells the truth, she would admit to lying the entire time, so she's trapped.
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump, which is why the people who know him best, including leaders of our national security community, have all spoken out. Even people who worked for him in the Oval Office, worked with him in the Situation Room, and have said he is unfit and dangerous and should never be president of the United States again, including his former vice president, which is why the job was open for him to choose another running mate. So that is a fact. That is a fact. I think this interview is supposed to be about the choices that your viewers should be presented about this election, and the contrast is important.
Yes, ma'am.
And on the subject of Iran, I am offering what should be an important contrast that is presented for folks to make a decision
and there are critics
that they feel.
who look at what the administration did and say and think differently.
Overall, this interview was extremely rushed and ended abruptly, and it really should have been an hour long. She was always going to be on the defensive here, as it's Fox News and this organization is very pro-Trump, but we see very noticeable spikes in her stress levels that reveal precisely where her insecurities lie, namely with her administration's handling of immigration and with her denial of Biden's cognitive decline. Should she get elected, they are going to have to face some very hard questions, as Biden's decline will only continue to get worse.